Hi everyone and welcome to my Tornado Druid guide for Season 4. This is one of the strongest builds in the game. In fact, for the max roll tier list, is the only S tier build that is not a Necromancer, at least pre-season launch from what we have gathered so far from the PTR, from testing and discussing the power of various builds. It is extremely strong and we expect it to perform very well. Tornado has been a powerhouse for the Druids in the past already. Back in Season 0, Season 1, it was the build in the game pretty much, and it's back. And the reason why it's back is because Tornado Druid got some fancy new tools that also apply to some of the other Druid builds. Namely, there is a lot of extra synergy with shifting in different forms. So you see here right now, in the past this was played with Grizzly Rage and you were in like this perma Grizzly Rage form, and this gave you all of this resource cost reduction, and you try to cast your tornadoes as a werewolf. You still do that, but you no longer run Grizzly Rage. Instead, now you just try to shift between bear and wolf all the time to get various bonuses. So this is what it looks like here. These clips that you see right now is some very unoptimized setup. I do have the required uniques for the endgame setup, but other than that, my build was not really like properly laid out, and there were a lot of like missing things basically. So the power level of this is very high. It's going to deal dozens, probably maybe even up to hundreds of millions of DPS in the far late game, and it's going to melt everything in the game outside of like the highest tiers in the pit with ease basically. On top of that, you're gonna have a lot of damage reduction because we have debilitating roar basically all the time in this build. You see this here right now, number 4 is the debilitating roar that gives you 70% damage reduction, and you can reset that skill thanks to Hunter's Zenith. So that's kind of how you play this build. You kind of run forward as a bear, then you cast the tornadoes as a wolf, and every time you kill an enemy as a wolf, you will reset your next bear skill, meaning you can just do debilitating roar and be extremely protected and tanky. Now, on the other hand, if you ever don't get any kills, then you don't have debilitating roar. So you also have to keep that in mind. It's kind of one of the big downsides of the build. If you mess up the timing, or if you're in a boss fight, for example, you just can't reset your debilitating roar, and you're gonna be in danger much more. So there is a bit of muscle memory that you have to learn here in order to do this. But other than that, it works really well. And you see here the bosses, they melt in seconds even on these tiers. And it does a lot of damage. So I have the full planner prepared for this. And let's get into it. Here we go. This is the planner. I have the entire equipment list here. There are some uniques that are mandatory for this build in the late game to actually unlock all of the damage multipliers, so this comes as no surprise. If you're talking about Tornado Druid, we talk about Tempest Roar. You have to get this item. It does work without the build, without this helm, but it's going to be much weaker. So while leveling up, if you really want to play Tornado, you can do that, as long as you have the Storm Chaser aspect here, which is the Tornado aspect that seeks out enemies. If you get that with a good roll pretty early, then you can probably just like start playing it. It will be all right. Generally, I would recommend to level up to at least close to 100 with something else until you get Tempest Roar. Now, the good thing is you can trade for this item now. Uniques are tradable in Season 4, and this means that any other Druid can give you one. You can buy one from the trade side or something like that. So it's not really going to be such a problem. And boss farming in general has become much more available. Drops have become much more available. So it will be not such a struggle to get a Tempest Roar anymore, I think. And on top of that, we also have the Hunter Zenith. I mentioned this in the clip. So this is the other kind of mandatory late game unique, at least. It's not really that important early on when you're not doing like high level pits or something, because it's mostly a defensive item. But it also has some offensive buffs as well from the Quick Shift. Quick Shift in particular is a very powerful passive. This is why you want to shift back and forth all the time. They've changed this in Season 4. So now it gives you a stacking damage buff. And it's up to 6% per rank of quick shift. You see this here, it goes up to 78%. And you could even get another quick shift rank, I believe. And yeah, I have it on an amulet, you have it on the ring. You have 13 ranks here on quick shift. It goes up to 78% damage multiplier as long as you shift back and forth every 3 seconds. Now, debilitating roar lasts 4 seconds. So the idea is that you get a kill with a werewolf skill, meaning your tornado with Tempest Roar. because that transforms it into a werewolf skill. And after killing something with werewolf skill, you can press debilitating roar for free. So you kill something, and then every 3 seconds you press debilitating roar. You have the perma 70% damage reduction, and you get the quick shift bonuses. And there's other bonuses for shifting as well. There's heightened sensors. So here you also get extra speed and damage reduction, and this one has a 6-second timer, so it's a bit more convenient. You also don't have to stack it up. So it can happen that sometimes quick shift drops and you just try to stack it up again. This is much easier to maintain. And then there's also the Wild Heart Hunger. This is a new fancy tool here that also goes with the entire theme of shifting around. So here you also get a stacking damage buff for shapeshifting back and forth. And you get like a buff that lasts 5 seconds after shifting. And then you get every 2 seconds another stacking damage buff. So 40 seconds after the start of the run, you're going to have this fully stacked for 30% extra damage bonus. So this is another pretty nice modifier here. So ultimately, you try to shift back and forth every 3 seconds for quick shift. But if it's every 5 or every 6 seconds, you know, it can work sometimes. You just have to stack this up again. Now, in the early game, when you don't have Tempest Roar, you cannot actually do any of this at all. And I guess you kind of see the necessity to get the Tempest Roar in the late game. It's just so many damage multipliers. You have one here, one there. You have this synergy of the Hunter Zenith and the Debilitating Roar. There's also stuff like, for example, Lust or Carnage, this one here. So this also allows you to just sustain your resources easier. So Tempest Roar is a really powerful item. You want to try to get this as soon as possible and then switch to basically this setup. Right now I don't have it finished yet, but there will be a kind of progression version without the Tempest Roar that I will put here as well, that you can just follow along as long as you don't have that item, because you will have to do some switches. But ultimately it's a similar play style and it's just going to be weaker. So I'm going to try to min-max this a little bit. It's so to accommodate the lack of the resources and these kind of things, so that you can still level up with a tornado if you want. Another note on the shifting forms is the Bestial Rampage as well. So here every 15 seconds you want to stay in one of the 2 forms for 2 seconds at least to get these buffs. So this is another really powerful buff here as well, and relatively easy to maintain. So you can even do this before getting Tempest Roar if you want. And Werewolf with the Tempest Roar at least are going to be all the time anyway. It's just that you have to stay in Werebear form for 2 seconds consecutively in order to get the other buff, the 50% damage buff. So you kind of have to stop attacking sometimes, basically. You just do like a trample or you do like a debilitating roar, and you just kind of wait another second, and then you start shifting around again. So there is a bit of like timing involved here, but you're gonna get this down with a bit of practice, I think. Then we have the 3 companions on the bar. You see that here. This is entirely just to buff the tornado with the Shepherds aspect. So we have Shepherds plus Stampede. This is a very typical combo for Druids. You deal more damage with your core skills per companion. You get extra companions. We pick up 1 point, 1 point, and the 2 extra ravens here. And then you have 9 companions, giving you a 180% damage buff with a 2-handed roll here. So that's a lot of damage. And you can play this without the companions, but it's going to be noticeably weaker in terms of DPS. Probably half or maybe even less DPS if you don't want to play this companion stuff. So yeah, technically you can pick up like a Petrify, and you can pick up maybe something like a Blood Howl or something like that. But I would not recommend it. This aspect is so powerful, you really want to try to make use of it. And if anything, you can just go for this aspect and then rather trade something else for extra defense if you want. You know, you can do some more life rolls, or you can, you know, just try to like min-max the Paragons a little bit better with more defense instead of offense or something like that. The last unique that I have in the setup here is a Temerity. This is maybe a bit surprising, but I kind of found there's not really a great defensive aspect to put here anymore. And the setup actually has a lot of healing. And when you have no good defensive aspects and you have a lot of healing, Temerity actually becomes somewhat worthwhile. So we have a lot of healing because we have a Circle of Life. Every time you use a nature magic skill, we get 3% of our life. This thing also has extra healing received, so this is more like 3.5% life. And we also have Masochistic here on the Spirit Boons. So this one also has a lucky hit chance to give you 5% of your life. And you're going to trigger this pretty reliably to the point where in large packs, you're probably going to heal for something like 10 to 20% life per second or so. Even on single targets, like 5 to 10% life per second is very reasonable. And you're going to stack up this barrier pretty fast. And on top of this, you can even press a potion to kind of pre-stack it even faster. So if you have leftover potions, you can just press a potion, get more of the barrier. I think it's a pretty solid choice in this setup. Alternatively, you can also just have normal pants and then just put another utility aspect or something like that here, or like a protector aspect. There's a few options here. You don't have to go to temerity, but I found it's a pretty solid option. Or you can also just have normal pants and put the vigorous aspect on the pants, and then you can have, for example, the Tiver's Might, the new Uber unique. I think that is also a decent option actually, because it gives you maximum all resistance and it gives you damage reduction, so that is pretty solid here. Outside of those uniques, we have a few other aspects that also give us more damage. Most importantly, the changeling stat aspect here. I have this on the neck. This one was also changed, and it now gives you extra damage when you hit crowd controlled enemies as a werewolf. It's very easy to crowd control enemies these days because we have, for example, these tempers here. Can just roll a chance to stun here. We also slow enemies once you have the Tempest Roar with the Neurotoxin. So that slow will already count from like any tornado hit basically to activate this thing. It just won't work on the bosses and it won't work on unstoppable enemies. So this is something to be aware of. If you want to have a bit more consistency, then I would suggest maybe the retaliation aspect that gives you extra damage for your core skills based on your fortify. That's an option as well. For example, if you fight tormented bosses a lot, or if you go really high in the pit where monsters actually become unstoppable all the time, this might be a better option there, but changing set is really powerful. And even in that scenario, it turns out to be really viable. So I just kind of put this there to have like the overall best damage output. On our gear, there are a few important modifiers that I really want to try to stack. Number one is a lot of tornado ranks on the gloves. Then we have the resource cost reduction on the two-handed weapon. This is the main reason to run a two-handed here. Not just the Shepherd's aspect, which is really strong, but you can also get this juicy, you see this here, 51% resource cost reduction. This is not even masterworked. So this is just a great affix. And this kind of replaces what used to be the dire werewolf aspect that gave you either 50% RCR or 75 if you put it on the neck. So this is how this used to be played, but it's no longer necessary because of this. And you just kind of sustain your resources much more easily once you have a two-handed weapon with a good roll here. So try to work on that early on, and then you also temper chance on tornadoes to cast twice. So you can get up to 77%, at least these are the values before the patch launches. So almost every time you cast a tornado, you'll actually get 2 of them. Sometimes you even get 4 of them because the tornado itself can split here. So there is a lot of tornadoes going off. And obviously a lot of lucky hits, a lot of procs here to get resources on the Tempest Roar, a lot of procs to get Energize, a lot of procs to get the Lust for Carnage. So there is a lot of resource recovery built in here once you have the combo online. And on top of this, you can even put something like Spirit per second here. I have this on a chest, for example. And this will just help you out in case you ever like kind of starve on resources, if something goes wrong, sometimes on the boss fights. You know, the boss might move around and there's only one target. So I have this as well, just as like fail-safe. Most of the time you won't really need a spirit per second though. And lastly, another important modifier to put on your items is the damage to close enemies. Technically, you could do damage to distant enemies, but this is a new tempo mod that you want to put on all of the offensive slots. You can have this on the rings, you can have this on the glove, the weapon, and the amulet. And this is a massive modifier here for Thunderstruck. You see this here, 147% damage multiplier. This is one of the reasons why Tornado Druid is popping off so hard. Not the only reason, but it's a huge multiplier. And you kind of try to stay in the close range, at least against very tanky targets, like if you're fighting a boss, if you're fighting elites, if you have the build having raw up anyway, you're going to be tanky enough that you don't have to worry about anything. And in that case, you get the close damage bonus and you get the Thunderstruck node, and you're just like melting everything around you. The rest of the gear is just like very basic stats. We have a bunch of crit, a bunch of attack speed. We try to hit the attack speed cap here. You see this here with 98%. So with a juicy roll here on the two-handed and the glove and the ring, you can get there. And yeah, crit chance, you have like 42 here right now. And you kind of want to try to stack up your crit because we have the Avian Wrath here for the extra 30% crit damage multiplier on the Spirit Boons, and we have Envenom. Envenom is basically the best passive in the game, I would say, and we really want to stack that up as high as possible. We also have it on the neck, for example. So this is another really strong reason to try to get your crit chance high. Technically, you could get more even here from the 5% from Scythe Talons, but I think the life is probably more recommended because you want to be tanky with the setup, you want to be close range, and when something goes wrong with the debilitating roar, you don't want to just instantly die. So I built this setup fairly sturdy, and I think this is not even calculated in. This is going to be like roughly like 40k life or so, which is pretty solid. Now lastly, for the Paragon tree, this is the entire setup here. There are 7 boards, so our spread is pretty thin, and we have 6 glyphs. One important note here is just that when you are not a werewolf yet, if you don't have Tempest Roar early on, then you can't profit from Lust for Carnage. However, I put this as the last board. So basically, once you hit level 100, this is when you're going to unlock this anyway. And then it's just a few points on this glyph here. So it's kind of like you can just put it and wait until you get a Tempest Roar. Other than that, the entire Paragon board kind of works anyway. Even in the early game when you don't have Tempest Roar and you don't poison stuff all the time and so on. Because, for example, here we have Heightened Malice. So we want to poison enemies as well. But it's also board number 6. So kind of the same story. If you don't have Tempest Roar yet, this is not really a loss because this is the last 2 boards you're going to attach here. And you can actually activate Heightened Malice with Poison Creeper. So later on, you don't really press your companions at all, like ever. But at least in the early game, especially like very early, like if you're actually leveling for level 1, the companions are pretty powerful. And then they over time just kind of slowly fall off. And Poison Creeper remains pretty useful, because it has this poison debuff, so this can activate Envenom for you, this can activate Heightened Malice for you. So even without the synergy of Tempest Roar giving you these Neurotoxin procs here, or just Toxic Claws procs, where you just poison everything when you hit them with tornadoes, you don't do that before getting this helm, so you can still do it with the Tempest Roar. You don't get this passive poisoning effect before you have Tempest Roar, so you have to do it actively before that to get these damage buffs. So that's it for this guide. Hope you enjoyed it. I wish you good luck in Season 4. As I mentioned, I will update the plan a little bit with like a leveling progression version as well. That includes the no Tempest Roar setup, where I might do some tweaks. But in the grand scheme of things, this is the build. And it's super fun to play, super fast. It kind of decimates everything. And I'm really looking forward to trying it out again in the season. So, hope you enjoyed this video here. And see you guys next time.